Okay. Okay. All right. We're recording. All right. So thank you everybody for coming. Yeah, we're just gonna get into this. So yeah, so this is the Trees of Springfield Armory. This is the first part of a two-part course that we're doing right now, which the first is this tree identification class, and the second is an in-person tree tour of the Springfield Armory grounds. So the trees that I'm showing you today, so we're going to be doing 9 trees today. And these 9 trees are all on the Springfield Armory grounds. So yeah, we're gonna go through, and these will all be a part of the tour too. So these won't be the first time that you'll see these if you come on Saturday at 10 o'clock. Oh, and also I'd like to just say thank you to the U.S. Forest Service and the National Park Service, specifically Jen Lapis for helping us put this all together, and everyone at ReGreen who helped out. Our guys, Carter and Ben, they did a lot of work IDing all the trees at the Springfield Armory, so I appreciate that. Also, I'd like to say just a quick shout out to one of our partners, which is Greening the Gateway Cities. They are giving out free trees all over Springfield. So all you have to do is visit massurbancanopy.org. The link is, or the website is right there at the top, or call 311, or you can get in contact with Nick Bain, which his information's below. Um, if anybody wants that, feel free to email me and I can send this over to you again, or I can, send an email after this class. But yeah, they're giving out free trees, so they'll give you a free shade tree on your yard or front yard or on the street belt that tree belt that you're on the street. So it's a really great program. Okay, so. How do we identify a tree? So, like I think in a lot of identification classes, it tends to be a lot of focus on the leaf. But my issue with the leaf is that it's not there the full year for a lot of trees. So we only really have it for half the year. So then a lot of people have trouble when it comes to the winter, or some trees have very similar leaves. And it's hard to tell the difference unless you've been looking at them for so long. So what I like to do is I kind of go off of this checklist here. So the leaf is the fourth of my checklist. But what I go off of first is I go off of location. So I usually ask, where am I? Because that usually tells a lot about, what the tree may be. You tend to find certain trees in forests, other ones in streets, other ones in parks. So then from there, I look at, okay, well, what's the shape of the tree? Because believe it or not, every single tree has its own distinct shape. Trees do this thing. It's called fractals, and this has been a scientific phenomenon for a bit, but it's basically repeating patterns. So sh trees fractalize, and they will actually repeat their patterns over and over again until they come to their final form. So that's the shape of the tree. Then we look at the bark, which the bark again, not a lot of people think about the bark too much. It all just kind of blends in and looks like brownish gray. But actually, I would say barks are just as distinct as leaves for most trees. It's the bark's pretty unique. So we'll look at the bark, and that's another thing that again, like when we're just at the ground level, we can look at it easily. And then there's the leaf, which if we have access to the leaf, you can find them on the floor. You look up above, there's the leaf, and then a seasonal feature, which these are things that kind of rotate throughout the year, but they're things that make the tree unique. So the first tree that we're going to be looking at is the pin oak. So the pin oak, this tree I want to start off with because if you go down Federal Street, which is the street that the armory's on, it's actually lined with pin oaks. And those pin oaks, some of them are hundreds of years old, so they've been there for a really long time. Um, but the pin oak is probably the most planted oak, maybe out of all of the oak trees. You find it on streets a lot. You find it in parks. It's in the forest. When they're young, they're kind of pyramidal, but when they get older, if you look at this picture, they're actually kind of like a big oval. And what's cool about this tree is that if you look at the branching, which you can see here, you'll see that what happens with the branching is it actually kind of explodes from the center. So the bottom branches go downward, the middle branches go to the side, and then the top branches go upward. So it's almost like everything's just exploding from the center. So that's a pretty distinct thing that I look for when I'm identifying a pin oak is, does it have those kind of exploding branches? Some people like to say too that, the bottom branches form a skirt around the tree. Um, so so this leaf, so what we call these bumps or the big parts that come out of the leaf, we call them lobes. So you can see that these leaves have 5 to 7 lobes. So the one on the left has 5 lobes, the one in the middle has 7 lobes. And then if it's the opposite of a lobe, you can think about them as a positive and a negative. It's a sinus. So the sinus is the negative, and you can see that on these leaves, the sinuses are really deep. So they really kind of cut down. So there's these very distinct lobes and very deep sinuses. And I would say that that is what characterizes the pin oak leaf. And it's also a very dark green glossy. I think it's a very tough leaf. Um, yeah, so and then um, the bark is pretty distinctive. It's like a dark, it's like a dark gray bark. And honestly, I think it's pretty smooth. It has ridges, but the ridges don't ever get like crazy defined. So you can kind of see well, we call these kind of ridges in this tree is we call them kind of like ski ridges. Like it almost looks like somebody was like kind of skiing down them and cutting back and forth a little bit, but going downhill if you guys are familiar with skiing. So you can think about it like that if it's easier. And there's also a lot of other oaks that have the same exact kind of ski ridge bark. So the pin oak also has some features that I feel like make it stand out, and these will make it really easy to identify. The first one is that in the spring, it actually has these big light green and yellow flowers that kind of burst out, and they're honestly one of the first things to come out during the spring. And the flowers they kind of run down on these little tiny chains, and then a couple weeks later, the leaves will start to grow out with them and a lot of these flowers will fall all over the ground and it just makes like a huge mess. But it's an easy way that, if you're just walking on the sidewalk and you see a bunch of these when you're looking down, you look up, you're probably looking at a pin oak tree. So, and then the pin oak gets a nice red color in the fall. It's really good. It's almost like a russet or like a bronze too, sometimes. And then it also has these acorns, which the acorns they can be striped sometimes, but they kind of have like this saucer-like cap, like a little tiny like bowl or something. And then it's almost like when it attaches to the acorn, it makes a full circle. So it's like this perfect circular acorn. It's a very compact acorn. So that is the pin oak. So our next tree, so we'll touch on some things that kind of set the oaks apart here. So this next tree is the northern red oak. And again, you'll find this most places, the park, yard, streets, forests. Um, oh, sorry, I just have to admit somebody. Hi, Ava, thanks for joining us. Um, we're just on the northern red oak right now. He didn't miss too much. We just did the pin oak. Um, But yeah, so the northern red oak is, I think it's the most common tree in all of the Northeast. Maybe the red maple and it are tied, but the northern red oak is probably one of the most common trees in this entire region. So you've probably seen it a lot of times. It gets planted almost everywhere. So they're rounder in their youth, but then when they get older, they tend to have like this big oval, which you can kind of see here. It kind of makes a big oval shape. So, and you can see here what the bones of that oval looks like. So we have these branches that kind of flatten out at the bottom, and then they get upright when they're older. So this again is how you can tell without even ever having to look at a leaf, just what a tree may be from a distance. So, and then the bark has those ski ridges again, like I was talking about. These ones are a little bit more defined, I would say, than the pin oak. I would say the pin oak is smooth, but these ones definitely start to become a lot deeper. So, and those look really nice. And then here's the leaf. So the main differences between this and the pin oak leaf, as you can see, is if you look at those lobes, which again, you can think of them as those big bumps in the leaf. Um, they're they're kind of similar, but then they don't jut out as much, and that's because the sinuses, which are the negative part, that part that's cutting in, they don't go in as much. They're not as dramatic. So it kind of looks more like this big full leaf than the pin oak. It's a lot more attached. So, and then also another thing, and I forgot to mention this about the pin oak, is that both of these oaks, if you look at their leaves, at the very tips, they have these things, it's called bristled tips, and they're basically these little hairs at the very tips of the leaves. And this is actually very common in the red oak family. So there's actually big families of oak trees. There's the red oaks, and then there's the white oaks. And white oaks have very smooth, rounded lobes, and the red oaks, they have kind of pointy lobes, and then they have those bristled tips. So you can kind of narrow it down by looking at that. And then again, they're dark green. They have a really nice red color in the fall. It looks like that. You can see those bristled tips there on the leaf. And then the acorn is a lot different from the pin oak. Because it almost I like to say that these acorns they have like a beret. It's almost like a French beret. It's like a French person. And they got their beret on and then it's kind of just like the proportions of a human face. So I like to think about this acorn as the French beret acorn. And it's a nice brown color too. So that is the Northern Red Oak. So now we have the sugar maple. So when we go to the armory on Saturday, this is probably the most common tree you'll see on the armory grounds. It's the sugar maple. And honestly, it's really cool because I've been to like a good amount of parks, and I don't think I've ever seen as many sugar maples as there are at the armory. And I didn't know that up until recently when we did the identification there. So I'm definitely excited to come back in the fall. I think everyone should go visit back in the fall after the trail walk to go see the sugar maples because they have the best color. But yeah, you find these in parks and yards in the forest. But one place you won't really find these is the street. So the two before, the red oak and the pin oak, you would find them in the street maybe sometimes. But the sugar maple you won't because it's just not tolerant of a lot of street conditions like salt and compaction and whatnot. So it's going to be more of a park tree, and you really got to have good conditions to grow it. It has that upright oval shape. It's really dense in the foliage. It's like really packed. So if you were beneath it and you look up, you're just seeing leaves. You won't really even see the sky, and it makes it really shady underneath. Um, and there's that form. So sometimes they can get a little bit circular. Um, but yeah, it's very distinct. And then I think something super distinct about the sugar maple is the bark. So the bark, when it gets older, like it is in this picture, it gets really, really light gray, and it starts to create almost these very thick plates. They're huge. And they'll basically like almost look like they're sliding off the tree. Um, and they just get massive and it's crazy. And they kind of twist up the tree. It almost looks like the entire tree is just shedding off these massive plates, almost like it's trying to throw them off itself. So it's a very distinct bark. Here's the leaf. It's probably the most viewed leaf in existence of the Northeast. It's got 3 to 5 lobes, and it's light green. But in the next tree, I'll show you why I wouldn't pay too much attention to the leaves on this one, though. But something that's interesting about the leaves on the sugar maple, though, is that this tree probably has the mo most diverse color palette, maybe out of any tree in the entire Northeast. it just has an insane amount of color, and that's why I'm saying during the fall, if you find yourself and you have time to go to the Springfield Armory, I would definitely check it out because those sugar maples are probably going to look crazy. You can see from this picture that it's just like a huge range of colors on the sugar maple. And it's really the tree that makes New England falls so special. So, and then so what we call the fruit on the maple is called a samara. So this is a samara. You've probably seen these. When I was a kid, they used to call them like the little like helicopter things, or we call them helicopters, and then you could like take off the piece of it. You could put them on your nose or whatever. And it was like a Pinocchio nose kind of thing. Anyway, though, this samara though, I remember. So actually, the samaras are on the trees right now. They come around this time, like in the late or midsummer into early fall. And I like to say the Samaras are shaped like a horseshoe. They have a horseshoe shape. And that's a really easy way to remember it. And this is another distinct thing about the tree. And then if you do happen to find yourself out in Western Mass, up in the Berkshires or up in Vermont, uh, Marianne, I remember you were saying you're up in Vermont now. There's a lot of maple production that happens in the early winter there about January and February and whatnot. And you'll see these little tin cans on the trees, and that's because they're collecting maple syrup. And sugar maples have the highest sap content. So sugar maple is the choice tree for a lot of the maple sugar that we have. But any maple tree can be tapped for um,
That's for me to say.
sugar
This
maple
is
syrup.
something
Sorry,
that
that's the
3-year-old
word. But
hold
yeah,
on
and they call it sugar bushing.
crossing the state. So,
That's the sugar or the maple syrup
well,
production term.
vision,
So there's our sugar maple.
Dylan,
Yes.
somebody's radio is on, I think.
or made
Oh, I think
that.
Mariana might be yeah, it's all
I
good.
got it. Sorry.
It's all good. No worries. Okay.
But
So
yes,
oh, and also
I
if
saw a ton of sugar maples today, but now they use blue tubing.
oh, do they?
Yes.
Well,
A little
some
high
people do.
tech.
Some people use the tubing. My
Yes.
family doesn't all the time. We sometimes use buckets.
Good idea.
Nice. I also forgot to say this too, and that's my bad. If anybody has any questions or any like concerns about anything, or you want me to repeat something, please just you can interrupt me. I don't want to just ramble on, I want to have a conversation. If anybody wants me to clarify something, I'm okay with doing that. So okay, so our next tree is the Norway Maple. So this is the tree I was telling you about, which is why I wouldn't pay too close attention to the sugar maple leaf and trying to remember the specifics of it, is because these trees basically have the exact same leaf. So the Norway Maple is basically everywhere. It's commonly planted as a street tree or a park tree. So this tree increased in popularity a lot, especially during the 70s and 80s, when the American elm, which used to be the most common street tree, started to die off because of Dutch elm disease and a bunch of really bad ice storms and whatnot. And this tree kind of took its place and it got planted everywhere. And now it's everywhere and it kind of just takes over ecosystems to the point to where uh, it's recognized as an invasive species in certain parts of America. So Massachusetts is considered an invasive species. I'm pretty sure it's actually illegal to plant the Norway maple nowadays, unless you use a certain cultivar, or you have some sort of special permission. But yeah, but you'll see it everywhere now. It's never going to go away at this point. Um, yeah, I tend to find that they have a little more weirdly and irregular shaped forms. I think like they're a little weak wooden, maybe the branches break off easily. But yeah, you can see that they have a similar form to the sugar maple, just not as, perfectly oval. And their bark. So this is the main way that I tell them apart, which is their bark. Because it doesn't have that silver bark. It actually has like a light brown bark, and it's very twisty. So if you look at the tree, it almost looks like if you could imagine all those ridges being straight. When it grows, it almost looks like somebody twists it, like you're opening or like twisting a plastic bottle or twisting a can open, and the whole thing is twisty all the way up. So that's how I tell the difference is the bark. So you can see those leaves, they look exactly the same. Um, I honestly, I can't, I still can't really tell the difference. It's hard. Um, but another thing that's really easy to tell the difference is if you take off the leaf, right, at the end of its petiole, which is that stem that actually holds the leaf. There's actually a milky sap that comes out from it. And this is another easy way that if you can grab a leaf, to tell is it a Norway maple or a sugar maple, is by finding that sap. It also has different Samaras than the sugar maple. So the sugar maple had those horseshoe ones. These ones have bird wing shaped Samara. So it looks like a bird flapping. And those are again also growing right now about this time, same time as the sugar maple. So we'll see those when we go to the armory. And then like I was saying, there are certain cultivars that are acceptable for the Norway maple because they don't spread as well. And one of those is the Crimson King. So you've probably seen these in somebody's yard or in a park somewhere, but this is the Crimson King cultivar of the Norway maple. So this one's also pretty common and you see it a lot. And it just has this deep purple leaf or crimson leaf. So that's our Norway maple. And then we have the Eastern White Pine, which I'm sure most of you have seen this tree. This is our only uh, coniferous tree on this entire list, which coniferous just means that it doesn't lose its leaves. So these are usually in parks or in forests and yards. Actually, one of the places where they're most common is if you guys have been out into the country at all. My parents live out in Hubbardston, and a lot of it's old agricultural fields, and there's tons of eastern white pine growing around there. And that's because ecologists say that the eastern white pine is a pioneer species, which just means that it's usually the first species to start growing if everything's just left out in the open. And it's usually the first species to start growing in a succession of other species that end up making the forest. But so you tend to find it a lot in old agricultural fields, and actually, back in the day in New England, in the 16s and 1700s, most of the forest got cut down. A lot of it got turned into agricultural fields, but then people started moving into the cities around the 1800s. And when people started doing that, a lot of fields got abandoned. And actually, there was these massive stands of white pine all across New England. And New England was actually one of the primary timber producers because it had so much white pine. It was just a massive operation. Um, so yeah, so that's a little quick story on white pine. And there's actually a great museum on it. It's the Harvard Forest. It's the Fisher Museum. So if you're ever in Petersham, you should go visit it because it has a great history on forest succession in Massachusetts and specifically the white pine's role in that. So I like to say that the white pine kind of has like if you were to think about like a bomb explosion, like a nuke or something, it's almost like a big plume. Like it just is it has this massive trunk that just goes up and up and up and up and up. And then it kind of just has this big puffy part at the top. So you can see that in here. I mean, I don't know how far this trunk goes down. It probably goes down a long way. The eastern white pine is actually the largest tree in all the Northeast. So it is a crazy tree. It gets really, really big, like hundreds of feet. I think some have been up to 200 or so feet, but I think they're commonly around 100 or 120 or so if they have some pretty good conditions. And then their branches, so what happens with the white pine is it kind of starts off bushy, and then when it gets older, it actually their branches start to break off because they usually grow in a forest setting, and they break off and they break off, and that's why you see the trunk is so bare at the bottom. That's because it did have branches there, but they're actually all broken off, and you can see it really good in this picture. which is below a white pine. And you can see that all those branches are broken off. It's almost like you could climb up it or something. And and yeah, so most of the leaves tend to be at the top or the needles. And I think this bark is pretty distinct too. I think it makes these big plates. They're big and brown. Um, but the leaf is also very distinct. So if you look very closely at this, you'll realize that this is a big collection of all these needles. And all these needles, they all get connected down to these points on their branch. And each one of these points holds five needles. So that's the best way, I think, to identify the white pine. It's already very easy to identify even from a distance, but if you really aren't sure, you just grab one of those needle sets and it always has five needles. And as far as I know, I think it's the only pine that does it. And they're these really soft, greenish blue needles. So, and then their feature is they have these pine cones, which are very long and slender. Most pine cones aren't this long and slender. And what you're looking at in this picture is we call it a spent cone, which means that it dropped out its seeds and it's all opened up. So usually those pine cones are actually greenish and they're really tightly packed. But then they kind of ripen and they open up and they let out all their seeds. So and these things grow really fast too. They're almost a little bit weedy too, but we like Eastern white pine. So sorry, I see there is some things in the chat. Sorry. Just want to check.
Just
Yes.
me being very chatty.
Oh, yeah, it's all good. Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, yeah, I can go I don't want to go too far into forest succession or whatnot, but yeah, it's the white pine is a it plays a super crucial role. And actually, I was just reading a paper maybe the other week about how a lot of ecologists are really worried that white pines aren't growing as well as they used to. They actually think because of climate change that they're going to end up becoming a lot shorter, maybe having like a little bit harder lifespan. So, that's a big change to our forests. And I know that in Springfield, we have Forest Park and, those places are beautiful, but those are like really the only forests around there. But like there's other parts of Massachusetts, like again, other parts of Western Mass, like the Berkshire, that just have these magnificent forests, and they have to regenerate themselves somehow, and it makes you think in the future, like how will the forest composition change of what trees are we looking at in the forest. So that is okay. Yeah. So there we go. So now we're gonna talk about the American elm. So this used to be the most common street tree in the United States. This tree was planted everywhere. It's the Massachusetts state tree. It's planted in front of maybe every single old school monument in Washington, D.C. that you can think of, in front of the Capitol, the Lincoln Memorial. This tree is probably like the most revered tree as far as I know. And they tend to really grow around rivers naturally. So actually, you can still see some of them growing around there. But yeah, they're mostly a street and a park tree in the urban environment. And what ended up happening and why you actually probably don't see too many of these anymore is in the 1900s, all throughout the 1900s, but definitely in some big spurts like the 70s and 80s, and I know the early 20s, there was Dutch elm disease and a whole host of beetles and other things that basically almost like took out all of the American elms. So there actually isn't really a lot left, and it's really kind of hard to find them unless you're in a place where there's somewhere that has a very strict, like insect and planting program where they monitor the trees every single year. So like if you go to the Dr. Seuss Museum and you go to that garden there, there's actually this one really, really big elm, but there used to be a ton of elms there, and they got replaced with London plane because a couple of them died. But that one elm that's there, it has like a super strict regime. I think I remember hearing one time that they actually aerate the soil all around it every single year, and they give it fungicides and all sort of stuff. Um, but why this tree is so why people love it so much is because it just has the most beautiful form. It's perfectly symmetrical and it just has this vase shape. And it just, if you have two on like either side, like if you create an alley and you just walk right down the road and there's elms on both sides, it creates this incredible canopy over you. It has this dappled light underneath it. It's just super nice. It's a super beautiful tree. But yeah, it's just very susceptible to disease and to bugs. So we don't really plant it anymore unless we know that we can give it a lot of care. So, and I like to say that the bark it almost has like these crisscrosses to it. You can especially see it in younger trees, but it kind of crisscrosses a little bit, like if they were being knitted over each other or something, um, down and up the tree. So, and then the leaf is also very distinct because it has this uneven bottom right here. So it's an unequal base. It has the serrate leaves, which serrate means those pointy parts. So in this case, it's doubly serrate. So there's some leaves that are serrate, which means that they just do like a point and then another point and then another point. Doubly serrate means that it has like a little point and then a big point. So you can see on these leaves, if you move along up it, every one of those big points you see has a little point right behind it or a little tip. And these leaves are most of the time dark green and they're pretty shiny. They're really nice leaves. So, and then the seasonal feature for this, there aren't too many. Um, it's already pretty unique in itself, but it is one of the first trees to flower and kind of bud in the spring. So if you're ever in Boston Common, they have a lot of elms too. And the elms are usually the first thing that you'll see. That's usually like our sign of spring in Boston are the elms blooming. And then also if you find a dead tree, well, it also might be an elm. And then this elm right here, so I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Florence Street. I forget if it's an Upper Hill or Old Hill, or maybe I'm completely wrong and it's neither of those. But in Springfield on Florence Street is this American elm. And I swear this is probably like one of the bigger trees in like all the city. Um, but yeah, a really nice elm if you're ever going down Florence Street for some reason or driving down, walking, whatever. Yeah, check out this tree because you never know when disaster could strike and the Dutch elm disease gets it or somebody runs into it or you just never know. So there's our American elm. So naturally, after the American elm is the honey locust, and I say naturally because when the American elm started to die off in all the cities, one of the main trees that they planted was the honey locust tree. And this tree, till this day, if you come to Boston, I live out in Cambridge, and I go biking in Boston and Cambridge a lot. We have a lot of really nice bike paths here. This tree is basically like the only tree you see on the street. One out of every five trees in Boston and Cambridge is a honey locust tree. And that's just street trees. That's not like the parks and the plazas and stuff. I'm telling you, this tree is everywhere. Because when the elm died, they were just like people wanted something with a similar form. Um, and and a lot of good light and shadow qualities, and they ended up choosing the honey locust, and now this tree is everywhere. um so I like to say that this tree has a portobello mushroom shape. Some people say it has like a big open spreading crown, but I like to think about it as a mushroom. If you look at these, it's kind of like they have a flat bottom, and those bottom branches they tend to be as wide as the tree's height. So this tree is almost like a box. It just has these perfect dimensions going sideways and going upwards. So I like to think about them as little mushrooms. And this bark is pretty distinct. I tend to find it's like has a light green tint to it, and it's gray. So and this also has those plates that are similar to the sugar maple, where it almost looks like when the tree gets older that it's trying to throw off its bark. Um, But yeah, and I also tend to find a lot of lichen growing on this tree too. So these are the leaves. They're pretty distinct. When so if you think about any of the leaves I've shown you so far, like the sugar maple or the Norway or the elm, those are what we call simple leaves, and that's just because it just is one leaf, and that's just it. That's all there is to it. But there's some leaves that we call pinnate or bipinnately compound, and what that means is that it's not just one simple leaf. It's actually a whole array of leaflets, and they all come together on one stalk to create the leaf. So in this case, there's usually about 20, 30 of these oval leaflets that are alternately arranged on each other on this, and those are what make up one leaf of the honey locust.
Hmm.
And what I mean by alternate too is we tend to look at branching of these leaves sometimes to help identify. And all alternate means is that it takes turns with the leaves. So can I draw on this? I can draw, I think. So you can see that right here, a leaflet starts, and then right here, another starts, and then right here, and they go right, left, right, left. It's almost like climbing up a ladder, and then the top two are together. So the leaves are a pretty distinct way of recognizing the honey locust tree. So let me try to go back. Okay. Yep. So, and then that's a closer look at the leaflets. They turn this school bus yellow in the fall.
Hmm.
It's probably one of the more beautiful trees in the fall. It's really amazing. But they're also really, really messy trees. But this is another way to identify them is, and you'll see this in Springfield because there's a lot in Springfield too. It's not just Boston. Like I said, this is everywhere. There'll be all this leaf litter on the ground, and maintenance people hate it. But it's worth it because it's a super nice yellow. But yeah, it makes a mess and it clogs up sewers and tons of other stuff. It also has these seed pods that it drops around the same time. And actually, you can see the seed pods on the tree right now. They're probably green right now, but when they mature, they're reddish brown and they get all curly when they mature. And then they drop on the ground, and these will also be on the ground too. So, like I said, it's a very messy tree. Also, the majority of the ones you see won't have these thorns because they're actually a certain variety of street tree, which is the thornless honey locust. But honey locust actually has thorns. So, and they're these massive things, they can literally impale you. They're huge. They're like, I've seen some that have been like 6 to 8 inches long. But yeah, most of the times if these are on the tree, they either get cut off, but actually the majority of honey locusts are grown in nurseries to be without the thorns. So you won't really see this, but you can see it. There's actually one on my street. So that's the honey locust. It's a very nice tree, one of my favorite trees. So next we have the ginkgo, which the ginkgo is going to be the most interesting tree you're going to learn about today. And I'm going to tell you why. And it's one of the most commonly planted street trees. It's native to China, so it's not from North America. It's about 10% of all the street trees in New York, so it's really planted heavily, and that's because it can withstand a lot of different soil conditions. It's a really, really tough tree. It can grow in almost anything you hand it. Um, but what's interesting about the ginkgo is that this is scientists like to call it like a fossil tree. Because all of its other known relatives, they went extinct hundreds of millions of years ago. This this ginkgo, specifically the Ginkgo biloba, the only one left in existence, this thing is older than the dinosaurs. It's like 200 million years old. So this is the oldest living tree literally like in existence that we have right now. And this thing just gets planted everywhere, all over the streets. Another crazy thing is that this tree, it what was I just gonna say? So it actually reproduces. It doesn't reproduce just by seed, how you would think most trees would, where they have the pollen, and there's flowering plants and whatnot. So that actually came only about 50 million or so years ago. That happened where things started to flower and they actually had pollinators move things back and forth. But actually, with a lot of old plants like the ginkgo and ferns and whatnot, they actually reproduce through sperm and egg. So what's crazy about the ginkgos is that they have these fruits and they have seeds in them, and these seeds have sperm in them, and they have eggs, and they have little live organisms inside of them. And it's kind of crazy because this wasn't even discovered until about the 70s in Japan. And this unlocked a huge thing in botany where people started to realize, like, oh, plants actually can reproduce. And a lot of these older ones that are hundreds of millions of years old, like ferns and ginkgos, through sperm and egg, and they don't pollinate through flowering. So it was a super big discovery. So some interesting things about the ginkgo, just little facts. It gets a beautiful yellow color, but yeah, usually the ginkgo just has this. I don't even really know how to explain the form, honestly. It kind of looks all jumbled, but it just looks like an ancient tree whenever you see it. It just looks like it's been there for like ever, and it just never moved. Um, and it just looks super cool. It's just so unique. It's the only tree in existence, so it's something to appreciate. It has this gray bark, like a brownish gray. Sometimes it's even like a really, really light gray bark. And it has these really narrow furrows in it, that tend to get darker. But but yeah, the bark is pretty a little bit distinct. It's smooth and it's gray. That's what I would remember. So the leaf is probably the most distinct thing on this tree. You probably all recognize this leaf. It's a lot of people like to call it a some people like to call trees with brands, which that just means like maybe you've heard of like Old Oak Cemetery, or there's some cafe, it's like Ginkgo Cafe. It's like a tree that becomes a brand. And the ginkgo leaf has become a brand at this point to where, you see it on products and you see it on locations. Um, but this tree, so actually in ancient China, they called the ginkgo the duckfoot tree. And this is gonna help you remember the leaf is it kind of looks like a duck's foot, and it has two lobes, and it splits in the middle. So this is our duckfoot tree, or our two lobes, or two light green lobes. And those turn really nice yellow. So you can see on that big one, it splits right down in the middle. There's our duckfoot. And then it produces these fruit, which you can see at the top of the fruit, it has almost like a silver kind of wax to it. Another name that this was called in ancient China and in Japan is the silver apricot tree. And that's because they have a bunch of wax on them and they're around these fruits. And the fruits drop, and to say it very politely, they smell really, really bad. Um, you just gotta smell it for yourself. I kind of think it smells like vomit. Um, but you'll definitely know if you're in the radius of a ginkgo tree in the late fall, if it's really smelly. But that's only for female trees. So only the female trees produce the fruit. So actually, throughout basically everywhere at this point, it's a standardized practice to not plant female ginkgos. People just plant male ginkgos. I personally think that I'm cool with the female ginkgos. I think it's an interesting feature. It smells really bad, but it's something that makes it unique, and is doing its thing. And actually, people eat parts of the fruit. People also mainly eat the seeds. So in China, it's actually culinary practice to take the seeds and to roast the seeds, and it's a part of a bunch of dishes over in China. And yeah, and people bring that here, and I've seen people collect the seeds in America too. But also all these leaves and all these fruits, they all fall at the same time. So again, it's really messy, and you can smell it. But it's crazy because 80% of the leaves all fall at the same time. There isn't any other tree that does stuff like this tree. And what's crazy is that it just creates this big yellow halo around the base of the tree. It's almost like it's snow angel, if you want to think about it like that. Its shape. Um, so that's another distinct thing. And most trees have hundreds of thousands of leaves if they're a mature tree. There's actually been a lot of ecologists who they go and they'll cut down a whole tree and they'll count every single leaf. A mature ginkgo can have 200,000 leaves, which is crazy to think about. It's an insane number of leaves. But 80% of those falling all at once, that's a crazy thing for any organism to do. So those are some unique things to help remember the ginkgo. So, and then our last tree we'll be talking about today. This tree actually isn't in the armory, but we're in the talks with people at the armory right now to get the first one ever planted at the Springfield Armory. We're hoping to do this maybe on Saturday. Um, but this is another one of the most common street trees you'll see um, all over the world, New England, and it's the London plane tree. And the reason it's called the London plane tree is because this tree was planted a lot in London during the Industrial Revolution. It also was discovered a little bit before that. So this tree is a hybrid. This actually doesn't exist in the wild. It's a hybrid of the American sycamore and the
Oh,
eastern sycamore, and they came together to create the London plane, which this happened in what ecologists most likely think was in Spain or France around the late 1600s. So, like I was saying, though, in the 1800s, a lot of these got planted in London during the Industrial Revolution. Well, why, you may ask? Well, that's because the air pollution was so bad. Not a lot of other trees could take it besides the London plane. And one of the reasons why the London plane could exist in those conditions is actually because it has this exfoliating bark, which we'll look at, that actually allows the tree to collect pollution on its bark and shed it off and open up new pores for it to be able to breathe. This tree is the bark alone is the most distinct. All you need to remember is the bark. This is the bark. It almost kind of looks like this like camo. I've heard people say it looks like it's painted on. It has this olive green to it. It's very creamy. It's literally like the most beautiful bark ever. I mean, just look at it. And the good thing about this too is that even in the winter, even when there is no leaves, this tree still looks so beautiful just because of the bark. But you can see how it looks like there's pieces and chunks coming off of it. So those lighter areas, that's where it's recently shed stuff. And if you got really, really close, even without a microscope, you can see that there's all these little tiny breathing pores that is breathing through. And those darker areas is where it's shedding. And this is another really messy tree around this time of the year, actually, because they just shed everywhere. But people just don't complain about it because I think people like the bark so much that they just don't care. Um, Beautiful leaf. It's almost like a maple leaf, but it's not. I would just remember that it's about 3 to 5 lobes. If you look at the bark, you'll know. But it's this dark green leaf. It looks like this. And it tends to turn like a yellowish or a brownish in the fall. And it looks like this. This is a variety of them. But it kind of looks like that. I really like the color of it. I think it's unique. It also has these fruits, which they're almost like these little tiny spiky balls. And actually, though, if you were to take these and you were to rip it apart, it's actually these little tiny feathery things that they're all attached to this one fruit piece. So actually, I'm blanking on the actual term of what this is right now. But if you think about a strawberry, the strawberry, it has the fruit, and then there's all those little leaves that pack itself on the fruit. This is doing the exact same thing. This is the exact same evolutionary mechanism, except the seeds on the strawberry, they kind of just, fall off and whatever. They rot in the ground and everything. But these ones, they have little feathers on them and they actually fly away, so they disperse. And then here to end this talk is this is a tree that we just planted over near Bay State Medical. Me and all my friends at ReGreen. And we did this with some medical residents actually. And some of this was our first time ever planting a tree. And we planted a London plane on Pratt Street. So again, this is right near Bay State Medical. And this is the tree. It's a super young one. This one's maybe like 5 or 7 years old, maybe a little bit older, something like that. But you can see if you look really closely at this that it has, maybe I can just draw actually, that it has these fruits, has its leaves, and then you can even see little tiny textures in the bark right there. And if you're wondering what this bag is around the base of the tree, that is called a gator bag. And all a gator bag does is it just holds water and it slow drips it out for the tree. And we use these bags because if we were to just water it with a hose, we'd waste a ton of water because the water would spill all over the street. You guys know it's hot out right now. It's just gonna evaporate and we're just gonna waste water. So what we do is we actually use these bags and that slow drips the water so it conserves it better and the tree gets as much water as possible right to its roots. So let me just erase this. Okay. And then now I believe, yes, so I believe that's it. So here are the sources that I used for this. So, I wouldn't say I'm like a tree expert, I'm just I just like trees and I want and I want to know what I'm looking at. So I do a lot of identification. Um, so the main book I use that if you really want to get into tree identification is there's this book called The Manual of Woody Landscape Plants. It's by Michael A. Durr. He was a botanist at the University of Georgia for I don't know how long, but this is basically the Bible of all plant identification. Anyone who, wants to know what a plant is consults this book. It's like the academic scientific text. So this is I literally have this sitting on my desk at all times whenever I go out. So that's the book right there. And then, but then again, though, if you're not that serious about it, you don't have to be, tree identification is one of those things where we can do this presentation, but the best thing you can do is just go out and just look at trees whenever you go on a walk or whenever you go to the park, or just wherever, anywhere you go, there's trees everywhere, and just ask, like, what is that tree? And just, look it up on Google, whatever you were looking at, take a photo of it. Even if you guys have iPhones, if you go into your photos, they identify plants for you now on the iPhone. Um, but so there's a lot of little like go-to guides here, some other helpful guides. I'll send all these out in an email if you guys want to look at these. But yeah, but these are just what I use to kind of, get familiar with like some of the terminology that people use, but then also, just sharpen up what I'm looking at because sometimes these people see things that, I don't see or we don't see. So that's going to be it. And thank you so much for everybody who came. I appreciate everyone for taking the time out of their day. And if anybody has any questions or, any suggestions or comments about the class, right now is that time. And again, yeah, I just appreciate everybody taking the time. So thank you so much.